I'm Don. Today we're painting a huge miniature from Creature Caster. This painting was commissioned by Colorful Creek and Studios, and this will be part of my article in Book Volume 3. Today we're speed painting this big miniature. However, I'm not using speed paints because I painted this a while back. In this video, I'll share with you 5 tips to paint big miniatures faster and better. I'm Don, welcome to my studio. This channel is supported by all these awesome brands. And of course, this channel won't be possible without the support of my patrons. If I were to paint this Creature Caster very big resin miniature today, I'll be painting with speed paints. However, with this one, we painted it differently. But I needed the painting to be super efficient, so I started with an airbrush. Now let's talk about my 5 tips on how to paint big miniatures faster and better while you watch me paint this miniature. My number 1 tip is to define the mood and the lighting of your painting or your miniature. Do you want it grim dark, or like me, I always want it grim pop? So for me, I want the mood to be grim-ish, but I want my colors to pop. Also, in terms of lighting, I always almost like it on my top right, or basically the left top side of the model. So defining the mood of your painting and the light source, your main light source, will make you paint more efficiently because you're painting more on the other side where your lighting is, or for some people, the top side of the model. And then you're focused on just building up your colors on those sides of the model, and of course, the more vibrant colors are also on those sides of the model. Now, my second tip to paint faster and yet better is to choose your colors or choose your color scheme and choose your paints before you start painting. The importance of selecting your colors before you start painting is kinda underrated, but trust me, while you're in the middle of painting, you don't want looking for a specific color while you're in the middle of painting. Do not choose just your base colors though. You should have at the very least your triad of 3 colors for that base color. You should have your shade colors or shade paints, and of course your highlight colors. So once you've defined your color scheme and then eventually selected your actual triad of colors, you'll be very efficient during the painting process. No more guesses or pauses while you're actually painting. For example, you just finished the base colors of the skin like in this video, then you transition to painting the skulls. If you have your triad of skull colors already, your shade and base color and highlights, and they're easy to reach, then you could easily transition to painting those details without thinking too much or pausing, and eventually sometimes you will tend to procrastinate. My third tip is sometimes like my last tip in my other videos, but basically you should know your paints. Knowing your paints, meaning how they look when they dry, and the combination of all these colors will lead you to a more efficient painting. This is actually my gripe. People who doesn't paint, or even people who doesn't draw, doesn't really know the study and the research and the memory work or memorization of what we do as artists or as painters. So they don't realize that we do a ton of visual memorization. But at the end of the day, all this study, all this research, and of course experimentation and experience with painting will lead to you being faster at what you do. My fourth tip is to plan your painting process or painting method. In this video, unlike my newer videos wherein I paint with speed paints, with this one I just painted with the regular paint and then just build up the layers and then really follow a certain process. Try to stick to your planning. Like, really try to stick to your planned process. It might not go like as planned, as sometimes this happens, like you have a certain plan and it doesn't look good, but you have to stick to it for a while until at the end you'll decide that you have to tweak your process to come up with a really good miniature. Needless to say, as cliche as it may sound, you really have to trust your own process. So as you plan your painting process or method, you should have a visual map on how you plan to do the whole painting. Having this visual map will guide you and will make sure that you kinda like build up confidence as you paint the miniature. It doesn't really matter what process you plan to use. You could use, like in this one, I use the airbrush so that it's really quick to paint the base colors. However, after using the airbrush, I had to paint the other parts which are not the same color as the base color I used for the airbrushing. I had to paint those again before I could paint the actual colors for the other elements of the model. So basically what I'm saying is that you could paint fast with whatever paints you plan to use as long as you have a very efficient process. Now, since most of my recent videos are all about army paint or speed paints, we're going to compare speed paints with oil paints. The main rule, most important rule with oil painting is the fat over thin. Let me explain. Fat over thin is basically painting the thin washes and thin glazes first. Let that dry a little bit before you paint the unthinned highlights or layers on top. Usually I like painting with my Gamsol fast matte oil paints because they dry in like less than 30 minutes, especially if I use Gamsol to thin them down. But basically, painting with thin glazes and washes first will let you layer on top later with thicker highlights or unthinned oil paints. Basically, the glazes are there and the washes should be done first because they dry faster. That's basically it. So seriously, when it comes to acrylics, this does not apply. I actually prefer like doing highlights first before doing final glazes or final shades or even speed paints. So this is actually a reverse of what I usually do. When I paint with regular paints, I highlight with cuttlefish colors and then do final glazes with speed paints. One of the main advantages of oils is basically its saturation. The pigments, especially the expensive oil paints like I'm not using right now, are really good and the pigments are really vibrant. However, this advantage of having really vibrant and good saturation with oil paints is no longer that obvious, especially with speed paints and cuttlefish colors. Basically, especially since new acrylic colors or paints are like formulated and designed to be very saturated and very vibrant. Now you see in the video, I apply oil paints with thick glazes, a little bit thicker than washes basically, and then you see now that I'm blending the edges with a clean brush. Well, basically the brush was cleaned with thinner, but you could also do this with speed paints. Well, not regular paints, but basically speed paint, especially speed paint 1.0, but you have to do it a little bit faster. Because with oil paints, you have a window of like 30 minutes or even an hour, but with speed paints, you only have a window of maybe 5 or 10 minutes or a little bit longer. Now, similar to the airbrushing earlier, apply as many washes or glazes as you can so that you have very good color depth. Now we finish off the model by painting the highlights. When you're painting highlights with oil paints, basically you do not thin the oils too much and you just paint it on top of the model. the great thing about highlighting with oils is that you could blend it down. So unlike acrylics wherein it dries super fast, what I do with acrylics is I paint the highlights and then tone down like the areas around the highlights with glazes. With oil paints, you don't have to do that since the oils are still wet for a while because you're painting it kind of thickly. You could blend the edges by simply using a clean brush. So the main difference is that you glaze on top of the highlights if you're using acrylics. With oil paints, you blend like the edges so that you have a nice highlight. And of course, the main advantage of highlighting with oil paints is that if you don't like your highlighting, you could simply wipe it off. Now it's time for our tip time. Now before I reveal a ton of thanks to all my patrons, because without my patrons, this channel won't be possible. So I haven't shared my last tip yet on how to paint big miniatures faster and better. But first, let's run down like the previous 4 tips before we continue with the 5th tip. To paint big miniatures faster and better, 1. Define the mood and lighting of your painting. 2. Choose your color scheme and paints before starting. Number 3. Know your paints. Number 4. Plan your painting process or method. Plan and plan and plan and have a visual map on how you plan to paint. And my last tip is to relax and enjoy the painting process. Actually, relaxing is kind of difficult sometimes, especially if there is added pressure. Like for this one, this will be an article for a Kickstarter at Kickstarter. Well, basically an article for a book. I will write a couple of articles for Colorful Kraken Studios. So there's a little bit of pressure to make it really good, but at the same time, like finish it super fast within 90 minutes. It's important to note though that the 90 minutes does not include the drying time. So the drying time takes a little bit longer. Actually, just using the hair dryer is longer than the actual painting of this model. So relaxing is not actually like easy, especially for me since I do this like for an article. But if you're just painting for yourself, it's very important that you relax and you trust the process. Enjoying the actual painting process though is very easy. It's like don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid if you're in a very ugly stage, because at the end of the day you could just layer up and add more highlights or do more shades and glazes. However, that will make your painting less efficient, but at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure you'll come up with a good miniature. Of course, there are a lot of compromises to speed paint, like a huge miniature. This is kinda super big, especially the wings. So you'll notice that I painted more highlights on my top right area of the model. So basically the top left side of the model. By painting more highlights there, I kinda create a volumetric effect. It's like the model is in an environment where the source of light is just on the other side. By painting like this, I kinda like do lazier painting on the dark side. Seriously, I really call it lazier painting or lazy painting, especially on the dark side or the crevices, especially the undersides of the model. But this gives me a very nice volume and like very solid, not solid, but a nice volume to my painting. Also, after watching this video, I hope you realize that although I love my speed paints these days, you could actually paint faster with regular paint, especially if you use the airbrush. Also, I hope you realize after watching this video that speed painting relies mostly on you being sure-footed in terms of your painting. And this could only be achieved if you really know your paints and you're confident that you could pull off any type of painting. And this requires a little bit of study, memorization, and of course, a little bit of experience. So to sum up everything, to be honest, it's as simple as the only way to paint faster is to paint, paint, and paint. That's it, Pansit. I hope you liked the video and watch these other videos.